Welcome to Orbicle Times Podcast, and hello to everyone, whatever part of the globe you're from or happen to reside in. My name is Kelly Jo, and here we'll provide armchair conversations gathered from interviews and research reviews to explore the seen, the unseen, and the in-between of the supernatural paranormal phenomena, with topics that circle around spirit orbs, NDEs, OBEs, UFOs, time slips, mystical moments, higher consciousness, and more. I hope that this cast will be our meeting place and judge-free zone where we can explore, learn, and grow through the telling of. This cast will be launched on a monthly basis or as a bi-weekly schedule whenever I'm able to make contact with those in the know for their telling of. And speaking of those in the know and the telling of, have you had a mystical moment or a supernatural paranormal experience? Care to share on this cast? Then consider stepping into the light with your telling of, or send in your monologue for me to read on this podcast. Simply email orbicletimspodcast@gmail.com for a chance to contribute to this cast. UFO Encounters, Higher Intelligence, or Hooligan Hijinks, Part 1. In the past year or so, one of the areas that I have been looking into is the possible connections between my experiences with spirit orb visitations, UFOs, and consciousness. I, with much hesitation, will now tell you about my 2 UFO sightings. I have only spoken about these experiences at the very most a handful of times, and that was in part due to my inquiries into such possible connections. I am now ready to speak, and I've written about these experiences, although with some trepidation. I suppose this acknowledgement on my part may cause some of you to label me as a tin hat wearer. Believe it or not, these encounters were not a highlight in my life. However, I have always believed in UFOs, and it has always mystified me as to why many do not believe. But first, my overall feelings about reported encounters are, in general, one of interest but also concern. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking on the same scale of concern as, say, Reagan, although that in and of itself is concerning. I have concerns about some of the reported methods that are utilized by ETs to make contact. I used the word contact as an overall descriptive, instead of denoting each example with the close encounter, quote, terminology and the system of classification behind it, which was first suggested in the astronomer and UFO researcher J. Allen Hijinks' 1972 book, The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, end quote, wiki. First encounter deals with someone seeing a UFO. The second, an alleged physical effect occurred. Mechanical interference, ringing in the ear, radiation effects, etc. The third is a UFO encounter that involves an entity that is animated. Side note, according to Wiki, nor a scale for encounters of the 4th or 5th kind. A few thoughts on some of those methods. If you are to believe experiencers, some of those attempted or successful methods of contact range from trespassing, B&E, or is that more like materialize and enter, abduction, kidnapping, mind control, memory lapse, missing time, drug-induced like states. This goes beyond your informal, still possibly traumatic, fly-by introduction, straight to criminal activity. And yes, I'm going to use the probe word, aka assault and torture, and let's not forget the adults who remembered that they were taken as children. Talk about your PTSD. Perhaps many of those experiencers did not get a chance to read How to Defend Yourself Against Alien Abductions by Anne Druffel, since it was published in 1998, and it seems that there were more reported abductions, not just sightings, prior to that year. However, I might be wrong. I have not read that book in its entirety, but don't have the impression that this is a blame the victim approach, but perhaps a you can wear what you want, but unfortunately you may have a desire to know how to defend yourself just in case approach. In her own words, Druffel writes, quote, but in particular, the book is for those who are seeking help in unwelcome interaction with unidentified visitors. Can I use that for my neighbors? She provides resistance techniques from numbers 1 to 9. So then resistance is not futile? They're formulated from the common generalizations of experiencers that range from mental struggle to protective rage and ends with repellence. I believe her techniques were based on some case studies of her experiencers, which she categorized into 6 groups. Her studies uncovered a segment from that group which had reported successful resistant strategies. I imagine that many experiencers struggle with mental health and require services for the after and ongoing residual effects from such encounters. Back in 1988, Anne Druffel wrote an article addressing abductee support groups. But where to go? Whether intentionally or not, today many are hitting the digital airwaves, whether intentionally or not, have become platforms for a type of armchair therapy, resulting in the recognition by others of mirrored experiences and accumulating in the courage to include their story and thus creating a community in the telling of. The reported methods that have been stated to be utilized in some encounters, whether one believes in those types of narratives or not, are extreme. Could this really be, as some believe, a case of higher intelligence? If that's true, why would a higher intelligence, at times, stoop to the level of a bag and tag and release mentality? Perhaps these are the intergalactic conservationists performing their scientific methodologies on us for the betterment of mankind and our planet. Or are these a type of hooligan hijinks? Perhaps like us, they too have their bad apple, and there's one in every crowd scenario. Perhaps these are, as John Mack, Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer and Harvard professor claims, quote, layered motions of reality. The question really to ask is, what is there in us? What world view, if you will, are we encased in that requires that we reduce this, meaning the experiences, to some kind of brain? Layered motions of reality is a theory that tend to be reinforced by interviews with people who believe they've been abducted by aliens. Hard to believe that such encounters might be for our own good. However, many experiencers also report that such methods, and perhaps the less extreme versions, have resulted in a range of positive benefits, such as a download of certain types of information, improved health outcomes for themselves or others, higher consciousness, telepathic and psychic abilities. Psychologists such as Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who hypnotically regressed abductees starting as far back as 1968, quote, believes that the aliens are kind and gentle cosmic citizens who are attempting to help the Earth with its various problems, end quote. Some experiencers have or hope to have continued contact. And let's not forget the other paranormal events that, although might be considered a negative, seem to at times surround such types of sightings. A coincidence? What do you think? If you know, let me know. I'm not combing through piles of information on all the types of experiences that have been reported. My information source, for the most part, has been podcasts and docs. Perhaps not the greatest research techniques. However, there seems to be a decent volume of and similarities within the narratives of those who have had such experiences, aka experiencers. In light of that, please forgive my examples, which no doubt will inevitably have omissions regarding the different, whether positive or negative, types of encounters. If some of these encounters involve beings of intelligence, then surely by now these entities are aware of how introductions are to be carried out, but perhaps not. Could this be a case of cover memories? Could experiencers have implanted memories, courtesy of these entities, for some other reason? Well, I never had any close encounters, at least none that I've been able to remember. I only had 2 UFO sightings, so I'll talk about them here for reasons that I mentioned earlier. Hopefully I don't get sidetracked again. And now on with the telling of the first of my 2 UFO sightings. The encounters happened at my home, so they occurred sometime in the last 14 years, which is how long we've been living here for. The first time it was with my daughter. It was summer, late afternoon, heading towards supper. I think the timeline may have been about 8 or 10 years ago, but I'm just not sure. Some background information about my first encounter, which included my daughter. The front of the home faces north. I live on the south side of that street. The street in front travels east-west. East on our street dead ends with a street going north-south. My daughter and I were on the veranda, or porch. We found ourselves on the street, looking east, staring at this, what I recall to be a bright yellow circular light that was hovering in the sky. There was no noise, no visual vibration that I can recall. Distance is a tricky thing, so, for argument's sake, small town blocks might be different than city blocks in terms of length. Maybe this light that we saw was the equivalent to 1 city block away from us. Its light did not hurt our eyes. We only had to lift our eyes and not our head in order to see it. If you're inclined to look up towards the sun, which one should not do, but if you look up, you would need about 2 adult hand widths with outstretched arms to cover and protect yourself from the dangerous visual effects. So what we were looking at would have easily taken 3 or 4 hands across, 2 to 3 down. And I think even then I would have been able to still see its illumination. We had been sitting on our porch and at some point noticed this light from the corner of my eye. And my daughter said, "What the heck is that? A UFO?" We walked into the middle of the road, not a busy street, so we looked up and I looked around hoping to see someone else outside to provide confirmation on what we were seeing, but there was nobody there, and that in itself was odd. The environment itself was very quiet. I didn't feel good looking at it, knowing it was there. My daughter wanted to walk towards it, and my thought was, why walk towards something potentially dangerous? For curiosity's sake. I was curt with her and told her to get in for supper or something like that. And we really didn't discuss it much further. She did go back outside onto the porch a little later. I would say, I don't know, within maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And it was still there. It has only been within the last 8 months or so that her and I really discussed what had occurred those years ago. I was never willing to call it a UFO because it did not fly but hovered. And when I say hovered, I don't remember any motion occurring within it. It was not until about a year ago or so I heard someone on a podcast describing a similar encounter that they had had, which made me think perhaps what we saw was more than just a ball of light. My second UFO encounter. My second UFO encounter timeline was somewhere around 6 years ago. I was out by myself one night to walk Molly the dog. It was late for me to be walking her. I usually walked her when there was light or earlier in the evening. I think it was between 10 and 11 p.m. I left the house and recall how quiet it was. Well, it was probably due to the fact that it was night and there was a slight mist or fog in the air. Not typical weather for southern Ontario, almost a novelty. I walked one of my 3 usual routes that I always did with my dog. That night, because it was later in the evening, it was going to be a shorter walk. I headed west, past 2 homes, arrived at the corner, turned left, which was south, past the first house that was on my left, and for some unknown reason, I was compelled to look up. The area in question has a house, which I passed, that has a very small driveway beside it, just enough for 1 car. In addition, right beside that is another house. So there's not much space in between these two homes. There's nothing of interest to look at. There's no trees there. There was no noise. Nothing that should have enticed me to gaze upward. Anyways, I looked up, and the atmosphere was something between a light mist and fog, or foggy-ish. Is that a word? Anyways, when I looked up, I saw 3 lights in the sky, and only lights. They were not blinding or blinking, and perhaps due to the atmosphere conditions, I could not see the object that these lights may have been housed in. The best way I can describe it, or one of the ways I can describe it, it was like looking into 3 separate smoky glass dome-shaped lights, like a set of lights. More than focusing on the number of lights, I focused on the shape of them. In an instant, my brain knew this was not normal. How was I seeing such a thing? This, for me, was a UFO. I can't say how high these were, because although the lights looked big, again, there was a slight mist in the air. My impression, though, was that the lights were housed within the same unit. I'm not sure why I thought that. I don't know. Why not 3 separate lights? I remember feeling such an adrenaline rush. I felt my heart racing. I felt like my legs were going to give out. I felt panic setting in. It was either flight or freeze, and I certainly was not going to fight. Just standing there, I ended up turning around and running, with the dog in hand. Well, not literally in hand, on the leash, back towards my house. I crashed through the door, out of breath from the experience, even though it was literally just around the block. And my husband happened to be in the kitchen, and I told him just what had happened, and he more or less said, "Okay, you're home now. Don't worry about it. It's all good." And nothing too much more was said after that. Not really. And now, mostly due to orb visitations, I found myself on the hunt, and I'm finding myself on the hunt for the connection between this experiences with supernatural or paranormal, and the possible connection between consciousness, and just basically all that good stuff. I would like to keep this cast a commercial-free zone. In light of that, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channels. All my orb videos are available by using the handle @SpiritOrbSightings, or visit my new channel with the handle @Orbicle Times Podcast. If you've already subscribed, many thanks. For blogs, episodes, show notes, bios, images, and video, please visit www.orbicletimes.com. If you enjoyed an episode, then please give a like or a share on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, or whatever podcatcher you happen to use. If you've already done so, much appreciated. Thank you for taking your time to visit these Orbicle Times. Orbicle Times Podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kelly Jo, at Studio Spare Room.